why are people living in the deepest, darkest regions of the world? Now, I know I was told in school, we learned about the bridge theory. They came out of Africa, they went down through a land bridge, and they went across into Alaska, and they worked their way down here in North America. Now, if this is true, I have some issues with that because I don't see people leaving Southern California for example, to move south into, through Mexico and continuing down there until they end up in the darkest parts of the Amazon rainforest. I'm just not seeing that. Or even, why would somebody settle in Upper Peninsula, Michigan after the first winter when they could move further south into Georgia or North Carolina or even down into Florida? Now, we even know that the plains were not routinely crossed by the inhabitants of what became known as the United States until the introduction of the horse in the 16th century. So, why do we have people in the most remote areas of the planet? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense based on what modern scientists, if you will, or sociologists or anthropologists try to tell us. Well, we're gonna look at how this happened next on Digging Deeper. Today, we're finishing the account of the history of mankind as a whole. That sometime after Noah and his family got off the boat, they were tasked with replenishing the earth. Then over the years, the family moved south and they settled between two major rivers, the Tigris and the Euphrates. And they settled in a beautiful valley, and it becomes called the Plain of Shinar. And it's in an area that became known as the Fertile Crescent. And it was a beautiful place. It was a place where it was easy to live. And the weather was good. The growing season was long. And it was relatively flat, which also made it easy to build. And life was good on the Plain of Shinar. People were having fun on the Plain of Shinar. The problem was that God did not tell them to stay on the Plain of Shinar. He told them to fill the earth. And the only way that they could fill the earth was to leave the central spot where everyone was living, namely the Plain of Shinar. And so Genesis chapter 10 gives us the breakdown of where the descendants of Noah ended up. And here is the record of the dispersion of mankind and the answer as to why the genetic code is the way that it is. See, the people dispersed by family. And so you would expect to find little genetic diversity in the X chromosome across the planet. And you would expect to find more diversity in the Y chromosome because they dispersed by family, the male all got the X from the one male, but the mom may have been from one of the other sons. And they all had their own wives, and so you would see more diversity in the Y chromosome than you would in the X. And that's exactly what we find across the planet. But we also see how different traits began to be seen in different parts of the world. For example, why the Celts look different from the Egyptians, why folks in Africa look different from people up in Asia, for example, what were the different traits that showed up. And so God gives us what I call the Table of Nations, and he gives us the account of how the people became settled and where they ended up by highlighting the genealogies of Japheth, Ham, and Shem. And so now it doesn't deal with every people group on the planet, because there were some folks that were just scattered in places that the only way they would get there, the only reason that they would be there is because if God put them there. So we're not going to look at those. We're going to look at the generalizations here. And but we do see that even in the most remote places on the planet, there are similar traits and similar genetic traits with people, and it seems to be another world away. And so as we look at the genealogies, we're going to notice that they're different from the ones that were earlier in Genesis. The genealogy that Moses records for us in Genesis chapter 10 is horizontal. It's not vertical. So it's not somebody had a son who had a son who had a son who had a son, but rather it's this person had a son and they ended up, and these were the people groups that came out of them. So what they do is that they show the political, geographical, and ethnic affiliations of the region. So it's explaining to the children of Israel why the people are in places that they are, why the world is the way it is, why the people groups are there, and the family lines that they come from. So the first thing he does is he gives us the line of Japheth in Genesis chapter 10, verses 1 through 5. And it says, "These are the generations of the sons of Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth, Gomer, Magog, Madai, Javan, Tubal, Meshach, and Tyrus. Now the sons of Gomer, Ashkenaz, Riphath, and Togarmah. The sons of Javan, Elisha, Tarshish, Kittim, and Dodanim. From these the coastland people spread their lands, each with his own language, by their clans in their nations." So the Japhethites, they were the northern people. They were the Medes, the Europeans, the Greeks, the Ionians. The Germans would come from Japheth. Now, these people didn't really figure that much in Israel's history during the kingdom years, although we do see them in the New Testament. And they do show up in prophecy. But this, for example, is a reason why that there was so many people who come from Iran, for example, that they are not of the same lineage. Why the folks from Iran and Iraq don't get along so well? Because the folks from Iraq, they're actually Japhethites, and they would be Aryans. So they would be somebody Hitler had no problem with. They were of a totally different family line than the folks in Iran, the folks in Saudi Arabia, and so on. And so they have different traits. That's why you can have Persians who are blonde hair and blue-eyed. And that actually kind of gets away from the stereotype as typically being, dark-skinned and dark hair with brown eyes. No, they could be light-skinned because they come from Japheth. So they'd be folks up in the north. And most of the Western European nations would have come from Japheth. And then you have the line of Ham. In Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 14, it says, "The sons of Ham were Cush, Egypt, Put, and Canaan. The sons of Cush, Seba, Havilah, Sabta, Rahama, and Septeka. The sons of Rahama, Sheba, and Dedan. Cush fathered Nimrod, and he was the first on the earth to be a mighty man. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, and therefore it is said, like Nimrod, a mighty hunter before the Lord. The beginning of his kingdom was Babel, Erech, Akkad, and Calneh in the land of Shinar. And from that land he went into Assyria, and he built Nineveh. Rehoboth, Ir, Calah, and Rezin, between Nineveh and Calah, that is the great city. Now Egypt fathered Ludim, Ananim, Lahabib, Naphtaim, Pathrusim, Kalsuahim, from whom the Philistines came, and Caphtorim. So Ham gives us the eastern and the southern Mesopotamia area, Arabia, Egypt, Sudan, Ethiopia, and the Persian Gulf region. Those who are on the southern part of in the Persian Gulf area, and then leading up to really where we would know of as Iraq, which would be Japheth. So that would be your typical Arabia, Egypt, Mesopotamia, and so on. Now in verse 8, we see Nimrod mentioned, and the centers that he founded became enemies of Israel. Think of Babylon and Nineveh, which was the capital of Assyria. And we'll find that from this area, from Babylon, is where the ancient gods came from. We'll talk about those in a couple of weeks, where what I would argue is a pantheon that is used in every other civilization, ancient civilization that Israel is going to come in contact with, and actually even the the pantheons of civilizations throughout the entire world. So Mizraim became the father of Egypt, and of course Ham was the father of Canaan, who was Israel's chief rival at the time and its chief enemy. And then you have, because of that, he gives us the line of Canaan in verses 15 to 20, where it says, Canaan fathered Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Girgashites, the Hivites, the Arkites, and the Sinites, the Arvadites, and the Zemarites, and the Hamathites. Afterwards, the clans of Canaan dispersed, and the territory of the Canaanites extended from Sidon in the direction of Gerar as far as Gaza, and in the direction of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim as far as Lasha. And these are the sons of Ham by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. So the boundaries of the promised land is described in verse 19. And this is very important to the Israelites because the Canaanites who were cursed are the ones who need to be displaced. And so he's explaining where God's taking them, that he put the people that were supposed to be dispersed. And the reason was they were cursed because of Ham's sin, and of looking at his father that we looked at last time. Canaan was the one who was cursed for that, and it was his descendants that ended up in the land of Canaan that the Israelites were told to disperse. So again, God is giving them the reason for what they are going to do. And that's what Genesis does. Genesis gives us the reason, because the thinking person is going to ask the question, where we're going into this land, why are we supposed to get rid of everybody? Well, Genesis is going to explain to them why. And then in verses 21 to 32, we find the line of Shem. It says, to Shem also, the father of all the children of Eber, the elder brother of Japheth, children were born. The sons of Shem, Elam, Asher, Arpachshad, Lud, and Aram. The sons of Aram, Uz, Hul, Gether, and Mash. Arpachshad fathered Shelah, and Shelah fathered Eber. To Eber were born two sons. The name of the one was Peleg, for in his days the earth was divided. And his brother's name was Joktan. Joktan fathered Alamad, Sheleph, Hazarmarpheth, Jereth, Hadoram, Uzal, Tiklal, Abel, Abimal, Sheba, Ophir, Havilah, and Jobab. All these were the sons of Joktan. Now the territory in which they lived extended from Mesha in the direction of Saphar to the south country of the east. Now these are the sons of Shem by their clans, their languages, their lands, and their nations. These are the clans of the sons of Noah according to their genealogies, in their nations, and from these the nations spread abroad in the earth after the flood. So the Shemite line was last because it was the one that concerned the Israelites. That's the one that they came from. They were Shemites. They were Semitic people. And they mostly settled on the Arabian Peninsula and around Babylon and Nineveh. In other words, they were close to the Hamites. And they also went up into Turkey. So now we have basically the area around, the whole area of which is going to, in any way, shape, or form, is going to affect the children of Israel. And explain to them why they're there. They're supposed to touch the entire world because God's going to place them in the crossroads of the world to where everybody from each of these three sons are going to have to pass through them to get to wherever they were going. And so God is going to place them in a strategic place so that they can bless the people groups of the world, all of the ethnos of the world. So this is why they were spread out. God wanted them to spread out. He spread them out according to their genealogies, their languages, and so on. But it doesn't give us the question of why. Why the people left the plain of Shinar? Well, in verse 25, it seems to indicate that the Tower of Babel happened 5 generations after the flood. So for the first 4 generations, they were very content to stay in the land of Shinar. And again, it was a fertile valley. There was the Fertile Crescent. It was a great place to be. The problem is that again, God wanted them to spread out because there wasn't enough there to keep an entire people group going. And again, it says they were. We find the phrase according to their families, according to their languages, according to their nations. Now, this probably describes where they ended up after the dispersion at the Tower of Babel. So, chapter 11, verses 1 through 8, explains how the nations came to be scattered across the face of the ancient world. And it's a message of judgment. What they prided themselves in became their downfall. And what they feared the most came upon them. So let's take a look at the account and then quickly break it down. In Genesis chapter 11, verses 1 through 9, it says, "Now the whole earth had one language and the same words. And as the people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, and they settled there. And they said to one another, 'Come, let us make bricks and burn them thoroughly.' And they had brick for stone and bitumen for mortar. And they said, 'Come, let us build ourselves a city and a tower with its top to the heavens. And let us make a name for ourselves, lest we be dispersed over the face of the whole earth.' And the Lord came down to see the city and the tower which the children of man had built. And the Lord said, 'Behold, they are one people, and they have all one language, and this is only the beginning of what they will do. And nothing that they propose to do will now be impossible for them. So come, let us go down and go down there and confuse their language, so that they may not understand one another's speech.' And so the Lord dispersed them from over there, from over the face of all the earth. And they left off building the city. And therefore its name was called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth. And from there the Lord dispersed them over all the face of the earth." So what happened? Why did God get so angry at them for building a building? Well, the answer is found in the first 4 verses. You see, the sin of the Shinarites appears to be immense pride. We see that in verse 4. Let us make a name for ourselves. You see, this was open rebellion against God. It was independence of God. Remember, sin is deciding for ourselves what's right or wrong, and that's exactly what they did. God told them to disperse, and they said, "We don't want to do it." So they were in open rebellion against God. And humility is often equated with trust and obedience. And conversely, pride is related to independence and disobedience. So there the people came together to strengthen themselves, and in pride, to make a reputation for themselves. Now, apparently, this would lead to evil, like before the flood. You see, unity to do evil is worse than dispersion and confusion. So what the people saw as their greatest ally, God destroyed. And they got down to the business of doing what God told them to do in the first place, disperse over the whole world. You see, whenever man makes something perfectly, God tends to show them the limitations. I mean, just think about when the Titanic was built. It was said that not even God could sink it, and it went down on its maiden voyage. So God dispersed them through all over the world. And this really is a fitting way to end this section. For you see, everywhere else that we have looked, the Lord has given a way out. There's always an act of grace, if you will. The covering for Adam and Eve, the mark for Cain, the rainbow for Noah. But here, there's nothing. It just ends with judgment. And the point here, which we're going to look at in our next podcast, is that mankind left on their own will not be able to fix the mess that was made. And since God can't fix the mess, since man can't fix the mess himself, then God must do something. And that's what the next section of Genesis is all about. God beginning to fix the mess that God had made. So just so we understand, the reason why people are spread out all over the world, because again, nothing else makes any sense. I mean, why are folks going to stay in Siberia, for example, when they don't have to? It's because God placed them there with their languages and so on. Why did people stay in the rainforest? How were they able even to know how to live in there? You can't evolve your way into that. No, I believe that God put them in places and gave them supernaturally the understanding of how to live. I think that's also why you have ziggurats or temples all over the planet that tend to look the same, and they all come from about the same time period, about the time period just after Babel. I believe that those people in those far off lands, whether it's in Mexico, whether it's in Hawaii, whether it's in Europe, I mean, all over the planet, they have these buildings that look a lot like ziggurats, which would be what the Tower of Babel would have looked like. I believe that they were built to remind them of the judgment of God. And in fact, we know that most of them that they started out as temples to the Most High God, and then of course, as didn't take long for them to develop or to descend into idol worship, because as we'll find out in a couple of weeks, that it didn't take long for the people groups on the planet to actually go into idol worship and start worshiping something other than the one true God. So next week we're going to take a look. We're going to take some time to look at the principles that we learn in this first section of Genesis that lays the foundation for the rest of the Bible, and then we'll continue on looking at the story of how God is going to fix the mess that mankind found itself in. So I thank you for making it to the end of the video. Pray that you have a wonderful week, especially as you're spending time with your siblings in Christ, worshiping the Lord this Sunday. And I look forward to seeing you again in a future video. God bless y'all.